Thank you, Mr Chair. Pleasure to continue speaking in this very, very good bill, which once had cross-party support. I'll be interested to see if New Zealand First have come to their senses and will now be voting for the bill. We'll wait and see. The member previously raised some interesting points. Part 2 really deals with the Financial Dispute Resolution Services part, even though she started to talk about some other matters which were in the earlier part. But she did raise a couple of points. And it came out in a recent study, actually, that the awareness of the dispute resolution schemes amongst the general public, amongst users, even suppliers, actually was lower than desired. And there is work going on by those various services and others to raise their profile, because they do play a key part in consumer dispute resolution, of course, in the life cycle of a consumer credit contract. And Mr Chair, just to note, the bill deals with that kind of life cycle, from the information disclosure, the responsible principles that must be adhered to, the stand-down period, the signing of the contract, and what can happen after that, then during the life of the contract, then if problems occur, and of course if the borrower has some complaints or some issues. It's important to note, I think, that the financial dispute resolution services are paid for by the industry. They are very, very low cost for the borrower or for the user. They are paid for industry good, and as the member earlier noted, that any entity that tries to engage in commercial lending activity, if they are not a member of a dispute resolution scheme, they cannot charge interest. They cannot charge interest. So it's somewhat of a pretty good and sharp economic incentive for those organisations to belong to an accessible, low-cost dispute resolution scheme, which by and large do a very, very good job. And I agree that the awareness of them will increase. But that will also be part of, the member asked about the Commerce Commission's information, sending out the changes and the new obligations to the sector out there. And I can assure the member, as I did in part 1 when I spoke, that yes, I've asked the Commerce Commission, and they have assured me that actually they are taking this kind of new retail-facing part of their work very, very seriously. They've already hired from the Mangere Budgeting Services a person who's like a community liaison, community advisor. Now that's something that the Commerce Commission have never had before, and as members noted in the previous part, that they are on the ground gaining knowledge and awareness to community groups of what they can do if something goes wrong, such as talking to the Financial Dispute Resolution Services, Mr Chair. So it is a pretty confined part of this bill, 77 through 90 odd, I think. But just one quick point, there are some changes in there which the FMA can make changes to, because sadly, and this is why we have such complex legislation that goes across many pages, as always, there are some out there trying to exploit holes in legislation. There have been some within New Zealand and from afar that have tried to exploit the good reputation that New Zealand has as a fair and just place to do business, backed up by robust regulation, justice system that has integrity. So some of the changes in those clauses there, Mr Chair, you'll note, give powers to the FMA to deregister various people or for services not to accept the registration from a particular individual, because some individuals with, sadly, ulterior motives of essentially trying to rip New Zealanders off, and others actually, have tried to use that stamp of approval as being a New Zealand FSP and being belonging to one of these dispute resolution services. And the procedures probably weren't as good as they could have been, as we've found out, to disallow those people to exploit New Zealand's very, very good name. And it's very important, Mr Chair, that we maintain our reputation around the world as a good place to do business domestically for New Zealanders, particularly for vulnerable New Zealanders, but of course across the country. So this closes some of those opportunities that individuals can use to exploit our regulatory environment for their own commercial gain, where in fact they have no standing whatsoever to do that. And as I said earlier, often their motives weren't good, and they may have had been convicted or have actions upon them in overseas jurisdictions. And this bill, this part of this bill, addresses those particular holes, Mr Chair.
Mr Chair.
Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, for the opportunity to speak to Part 2 of this Credit Contracts and